more intrusive into your life.
Oh, I did not know that. Well, again, Jerry, thank you so much for taking the time to do this and getting
Yeah.
on with me. I appreciate it immensely. I got questions.
Okay.
I guess the first one is what was the impetus for you to decide to go out with Adrian Belew and do this album live?
Well, Adrian and I have remained friends since when we first met, and somewhat because my wife and I are both from Milwaukee, and we would come back to Milwaukee. I inherited my parents' house, and we would have our children there. And I had found a studio in Milwaukee, a couple of them, but I also found Lake Geneva had this beautiful studio that had been begun by being the studio for Playboy Records, and they had a resort there
Hmm.
with two great golf courses. It fell on disrepair. Playboy sold it to the Americana Resorts. The studio was bought by a diamond dealer who outfitted it with the most amazing equipment. And Adrian had moved up, I think, from Springfield have access to this studio because it was very fairly priced. And so we would see each other in Wisconsin for years, and he played on every one of my solo records. And then when he moved to Nashville, I had various reasons to go through Nashville. I made a film called Take Me to the River about Memphis music, and we were at the Nashville Film Festival, and we were at a couple of other things for a Grammy event there and stuff like that. And so Adrian and I would always have dinner, and we'd always come back to that. There's a YouTube video from Rome, 1980, of the Remain in Light concert, and I'm
Hmm.
always was quite aware that as specialists stop making sense is that there was something different and unique about that first iteration of the big band. And Adrian would go like, the people who contact me on Facebook or on Instagram, a lot of times conversations come back to what a joyous concert that was. And we
Hmm.
constantly were saying, it's like, well, is there anything we can do to sort of bring it back or use it as a blueprint? And then I produced the band Turquoise, who were very influenced by Talking Heads, and I used to sit in with them, and we'd always do a Talking Heads song. So I was like happened to run into their manager at Outside Lands here in San Francisco, and brought it up to him. I said, would they be interested in doing a tour with Adrian and me? And they were. And
Wow.
that morphed into them being cool, 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 and the lead singer Dave Brandt with they just had kind of the band has run out of patience and energy for being, they'd really lived very hand to mouth and been on tour. And one thing about them is one of the reasons it works is that they're not spoiled, and it's a very big band for us to maintain on the road.
Hmm.
And they're used to living on the bus, but like all these details that if we use studio musicians wouldn't exist is like they know who are if there's someplace they know who to share a room with. They
Right.
know who likes the top bunk, the middle bunk, and the bottom bunk. They know just all the kinks that happen had been worked out, and that meant that we could do it. And it's been a great deal of fun.
Now, so your transition after Talking Heads had ended, your transition into production, although you had produced albums for people
Yes.
before Talking Heads, but how did you make that transition after Talking Heads to start really focusing on producing other folks?
Well, I have to say that my wife had something to do with it. We were starting to have children, and she goes, "You're not going to be at home if you're trying to support these records and as well as the tour for Casual Gods. I lost money on it quite a lot. I mean, I put a lot of my own money into it, and it's sort of like, well, we can't do this every year. And and then I started doing it, and I had I had actually the biggest year of my life when I did Crash Test Dummies and Throwing Copper in the same year. So, and then I was like, well, I'm going to keep going run with this. I mean,
That's tough.
it sort of cut short the solo records because if you're working 12 months a year on production,
Mm.
there's not much time. It was a great run in the 90s and into the 2000s. It's sort of when I started GarageBand.com, I had two records not come out. And then, like in the ensuing years, there were a couple of other records because of the band's decision making
Mm.
and also the sort of the volatility that started to happen in the record industry. I did a wonderful band called Mr. North for BMG, and
Mm.
Bob Jameson, the president of the label, was totally into it. And then he got fired, and Clive Davis took over. And Clive Davis said, was like, "Well, I don't want anything that I wasn't involved with." So some unfortunate things where, so like my name as a producer started to be less in the conversation. We'll say.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like when a GM takes over a sports team and then says he's going to jettison everybody else because he didn't have anything to do with them. It sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's also, this is the thing is like when you're a new CEO, you push all the losses onto the previous guy
Sure.
so that the balance sheet can look like it's, when once you got your staff going, it all looked positive.
Right. And now you've also been out touring with the Stop Making Sense movie. It seems like almost a chicken and egg with the Stop Making Sense tour and the Remain in Light
Yeah.
tour.
Yeah.
Did one spur the other one in any way?
Not particularly. I mean, I was doing the Remain Light tour, but then when I realized that we were going to be re-releasing Stop Making Sense, I knew that it was going to need a new Atmos mix. And the engineer I work with all the time, E.T. Thorngren, I kind of said to him, "We got to get going on this right away because I know there will be problems, and we really want to take our time." And as it worked out, starting early was a good idea because it was still a rush at the end. There were some missing pieces. There was a tape that was in a vault in Kansas that was only tracked down at the last second. It was at the MGM vault, and MGM has nothing to do with the people who were involved with this movie, but they had it. And so, but deciding to go and do this speaking tour with it, when we did we did a series of promotional screenings where the four of us were there. We did a couple in LA and a couple in New York. And as it worked out, it's like I was the only one who knew anything about what the restoration process was like because I was the one who did it and
Right.
was involved with the people. And so, a certain number of the questions are about, well, are you going to get back together again, or various interpersonal questions. But all of the questions about this new re-release were really, I had to field. And I'm going, well, I sort of can do this on my own. And I
Mm.
thought it would be kind of fun and nice for the fans to go out and do this. And so that I could present certain facts so they could understand what it took to get it re-released, but also give them the opportunity to ask questions of one of the talking heads.
Are there when you started restoring it and watching the movie, were there things that you saw that you were like, I barely remember that, but that was really cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's also when you start to see with higher resolution, it's like you like notice things. It's like, wow, I never quite noticed that. I vaguely noticed it, but now I really see it.
Right.
And also the Atmos mixing is, the ability to have everything sort of spatially around you meant that you would hear various parts more clearly simultaneously. So that was great fun, being able to sort of dr- pull out the detail.
Right. And I mean, so for me personally, it the movie is the movie is all I have. So at that time when you guys played the Pantages in LA, I was working at a record store and I was the manager, and there were two of us. So if one of us didn't work, the other one had to work. And somehow I drew the short straw and I
Uh,
had to leave. And the next day, everybody's coming in and telling me about this show
yep.
that I never got to see.
Uh,
So the movie for me has been an absolute blessing because hearing people
yeah.
go, "Oh man, you missed it. This was the greatest." They came out, there was nobody on stage, and then there was one person on stage and they started playing and everybody wasn't on stage till like the second or third song. And just this whole thing that I
Yeah.
didn't get to experience. So now it's really joyous for me to be able to see especially all the stuff that you've uncovered and
Yeah.
put into this new one.
Yeah, it's great. And we've had, it's screened everywhere from like this high definition IMAX where you're in like a stadium. It's
Right.
almost dangerous to get up and dance, to a place where like Vidiots in Pasadena, where basically it was largely people dancing in the aisles. My wife and I went to the Rome Film Festival, and there was a screening up in Milan that was at basically a dance club and they had two professional dancers come out and sort of try and teach people David's weird dance moves. And they had a rack of big suits that people could try on
Really?
and have their pictures taken. It was so much fun. It was like it's like a dance party. It was and
Wow.
I almost think you need to go watch this in two different places. You need to watch it with as high definition of video and Atmos sound as you can find, and then you need to go someplace where it's really built for dancing.
Well, so let me jump back now to kind of the beginning. I mean, I hate to use the word kismet, but it seems almost like kismet in the way that you ended up in Talking Heads because you were studying architecture at
Yes,
Harvard.
yeah. It's also that record that we made in 1972 with the Modern Lovers didn't come out till 1976.
Mm.
And so it was very fresh, and it was the only record that sort of uh, shared the same sort of point of view of the burgeoning punk music, of raw, short and sweet songs, maybe intense messages that you wanted to get across, but you want to get them across quickly. And so yeah, I think it was almost a blueprint for what punk bands were going to do. And so I mean, that's why I think the Talking Heads heard that and they thought that I might be an ideal addition for them.
Mhm.
You know, uh, it was a funny experience though, because they called me up and they got my number through. As it worked out, Chris and Tina's parents knew Ernie Brooks of the Modern Lovers' uncle and aunt,
Wow.
and in Pittsburgh. And so I get this call, and he goes like, "Would you like to come down and jam sometime? We're thinking of adding a member." And it took me a long time to get down there. I was so broke that I had to. Ernie and I were moving a family to New York in the band van, and by the time we got it packed, there wasn't room for the organ. So I showed up at their loft with a guitar, and they go, "But we're looking for a keyboard player." And I said, "Well, let's just play some music together." But it sort of gelled immediately. And then I came back down with the keyboard and played a show with them at the Lower Manhattan Ocean Club. And then out in New Jersey, a private party that there are pictures from on the album. The name of this band is Talking Heads, is from that night. That's like the second night I ever played with them.
Wow. And then that was kind of it. So
Yeah, that was it. And then they were nice enough to let me finish the first semester. I was just in the beginning the first semester of architecture school, and I kind of
wow.
said, my parents will absolutely kill me if I chop out without even finishing a
It's
semester. Because like once you'd finish the semester, they would probably let you come back if things didn't work out. You know.
so now when the cool thing that I liked about the re-release is you release stuff from CBGB's, the live shows,
Hmm.
which seems much earlier than the actual Stop Making Sense uh, film.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
And it's the sound, and that you talk about the raw sound, and the thing
Yep.
that always struck me, especially about bands like Talking Heads, is that the live performance isn't much like the album performance.
Yeah.
And hearing those different versions of songs from CBGB's, especially early on, was really outstanding.
Yeah. It's well, it really reveals itself, and I'm also particularly, there are we have a lot of versions of Psycho Killer, and what David and I play on guitar changes many times, and it's really fun to like hear the differences.
Yeah, I mean there's some of the version it's almost not recognizable, which is quite cool because the arrangement is completely different.
Yeah, yeah.
Was that really part of the part of what made it so I guess interesting for you is that really shows were not the same from night to night as you guys would
Oh,
improvise.
we were pretty consistent, but things would just sort of morph over time.
Hmm.
So shows, they weren't that different within the middle of the tour, but as you moved over the years, things would start to change. And I mean, also, certainly on guitar, I got to be a much better guitar player being in the Talking Heads. I started playing guitar at the end of the Modern Lovers, so I was a pretty new guitar player. Um, and my playing just got more, I got to be a better player and learn things from David, for instance, and things like that. And, I think at our height, we started to, well, rival is the wrong word, but, the interplay between Richard Lloyd and Tom Verlaine in television is so beautiful. And I think by the time of, say, Fear of Music and stuff like that, that there was a great interplay of the guitar lines between David and me.
Yeah. Do you ever think what might have course you might have taken had you gone back for that second semester at Harvard?
Well, I think I would have been a good architect. I have a really good visual sense, and um, I liked it a lot. It's a career that a little bit like being a filmmaker in the beginning, particularly. Now with video, it's not quite this way. But the one thing that I think is bad about architecture is that you're working for clients who are paying for everything, and they're usually, wealthy companies, governments, wealthy individuals, and they have a lot of opinions and a lot of say, and so it's you're balancing what you want to do with what they want to do, and you're also trying to design a building that satisfies their needs. So you have to actually spend a bunch of time interviewing them and talking to them to understand what they need. I just heard about an interesting architect who would go live for a month with each family that he designed something for.
Really?
And, he could pick up notes about, man, these people need space, the ability to get away from each other because, you know,
Yeah.
when they come together, a lot of arguments happen, or this person in particular needs his private space or her private space because or holy, look at how big clothes the wife of
Right.
this
Right.
family has. We need to make sure there's a big closet, or we need, and people don't always know what they need.
Right.
They think they know, but
Right.
an architect who is trained will um, notice things. I mean, there's almost probably a checklist you can go through about this. My wife and I were largely responsible for the redesign of the house we live in, which I'm talking from. And I had read a book when I was in architecture school called Community and Privacy. And what we the Community and Privacy asserted that if you can do it, uh, the parents should have their space that's somehow a little bit away from their children.
Mhm.
They should have some sense that of a space that's privately theirs, and
Mhm.
that will basically cause for happier parents and happier children. And so I definitely incorporated that into the design of our house here. And I
Mhm.
think it really, really worked because it meant that, two people could be watching different TV shows without bothering each other or something as simple as that.
Right.
But it even got to the point, it's like, someone could be sort of having a bunch of friends over, and they're yelling, and the din of them would not be. You might hear it, but you didn't hear it so loudly that you couldn't think or do something else.
Right. Now, do you feel like that helped you with collaborating with bands as well when you would get into the studio? More so, I would say more so in the studio than live. It seems
Yeah.
like the collaborative part really has to take place in the studio.
Yeah,
And
I think that, um, I mean, I think this even goes back to my father was a member of an advertising agency, which was a partnership.
mm,
And I saw how diplomatic he needed to be and he very often, he had there was one member whose expertise was copywriting,
mm,
and another whose expertise was really visual. And my father could kind of do both, but not maybe to the level of either of the other two people who devoted all their time to that. And so he often gravitated to being the person who dealt with the clients because my father was a very friendly and diplomatic person. And so it was a good blend for that partnership. But I think that was about the closest thing as to being in a band you could see is like these partnerships like this don't last if you have people constantly butting heads.
mm, right.
And you have to have a respect for the people that you're with, but you have to have a certain amount of self-discipline to allow yourself to sometimes not push arguments as far as they could possibly go.
Mm. All right, we're running out of time. I have one more question. So you had a song called 5 Minutes,
Yes,
which is sadly relevant still today.
yes, yes.
um, have you thought about potentially updating that song or re-releasing that song? Because it so I mean from my perspective, that's that's kind of when it started was
Yeah,
with that particular administration when you wrote that song.
yep. Well,
Um,
a very interesting thing about Ronald Reagan is the architect of gun control in this country. And Ronald Reagan is the beginning of the explosion of the national debt
right,
because he quadrupled the national debt. We became the largest borrowing nation in the world, and we had previously been the nation that lent out the most money. So it ended up bankrupting the Soviet Union, so it had perhaps a very positive effect. But it all the things that people complain about now, the national debt, and of course all the people who are revere Ronald Reagan conveniently forget that he's the architect of gun control in this country because he didn't like it when the Black Panthers showed up with rifles
right,
in Sacramento.
right,
And not to mention that the Brady bill from the assassination attempt
right.
came out of his administration. Um, there's a lot of convenient forgetfulness, I think,
Yeah,
in politics, and really, and this is bipartisan forgetfulness. But I do think, I did get audited the next year after I made that record.
did you really?
And it was it was the highest level of audit that the IRS has. The one that is supposed to be randomly pulled out of a hat.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I think that political retribution didn't begin with the current administration.
No doubt. I mean, deregulation of the airline industry, deregulation of the media industry. You know,
Yeah.
you didn't used to be able to own a television station and a radio station.
Well, I think that there was a lot of, I get some of I mean, Clinton, by the way, continued that completely. And Clinton's, as far as the protection of personal rights, Clinton was terrible.
Yeah,
Um, Interestingly, Monica Lewinsky could not have been deposed had Bill Clinton not championed the changing of how people could be called for witnesses because of the he had been the sort of Andrea Dworkin feminist groups that were friends with Hillary were championing that previous accusations could be brought in to things about sexual crimes because there were lots of people who had had multiple, let's say, child abuse charges that people finally dropped. A settlement was done. It was just too hard to prove.
right,
And you could not bring that up in something that had been a previous accusation. You can only bring up previous convictions, which is in general the way it is through all of the law, except for, with the exception of uh, basically sex crimes.
right.
And so Clinton sort of was hoisted on his own petard there.
Yeah,
Um, uh, the thing is, I think that the local control of radio and TV and the requirement that banks have a connection to the states that they're in, there were twin things that caused that change. Is one thing is that like Mitsubishi Bank and some of the foreign banks had the opportunity to be much bigger than the big banks in the United States. And so the idea of allowing the big New York banks to go all across the country, and then of course Charlotte bought up things like Bank of America. I mean Bank of America, which had been a California bank, allowed them to operate on the scale of these big international banks, but it also sort of removed local control. I don't think we would have ever had the 2008 crisis had the banks that lent the money for the homeowners and for the apartment, had the connection in the state, and people actually had gone and looked at the sites and the securitization of mortgages is a
right,
clever idea, and there's some good things about it, but it so relies upon the ratings, and the ratings agencies were corrupt or lazy.
right.
So, yeah.
Well, John says we got to wrap things up.
All right. Okay.
Very, God, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you are very busy, and I'm hoping to catch you in. I think Bend is the closest you're going to get to me.
All right. Well, where do you live?
Or Eugene.
Eugene. Well, great place. We had a great concert when we played at Eugene. So
Yeah,
I hope
we
I
have.
get back there with Adrian. It would be a great fun place to
Oh,
play.
be fantastic. We have a great venue for you to play too.
No, I know that venue. It's fun. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice to talk
Okay.
to you. Thanks.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye bye.